Have you ever found yourself in a situation where everything around you seems to be falling apart? Where trusted advisors urge you to run and hide? Where the very foundations of society appear to be crumbling beneath your feet? In 1011 BCE, a young man found himself in precisely such a predicament. His name was David, future king of Israel, but at that moment, simply a man on the run. Pursued relentlessly by King Saul, whose jealousy had transformed into murderous rage, David faced a pivotal decision: flee to the mountains as his friends advised, or stand firm in his faith in God's protection. This tension between flight and faith forms the heart of Psalm 11, a powerful ancient poem that resonates with surprising relevance even today, over 3,000 years later. And the answer David discovered might just change how you face your own moments of crisis. The ancient city of Jerusalem, 3,000 years ago. Political intrigue, betrayal, and the constant threat of violence shaped daily life for many. Among the dusty streets and stone buildings, we find the backdrop for one of history's most profound expressions of trust amid chaos, Psalm 11. Written during one of the most turbulent periods in ancient Israel's history, this psalm captures a critical moment in David's life, a moment where everything hung in the balance. Scholars date this psalm to approximately 1011 to 1010 BCE, during David's years fleeing from King Saul, before he ascended to the throne in 1004 BCE. But before we delve into the rich text of Psalm 11, I want us to understand its context. The period between 1020 to 1000 BCE was marked by tremendous upheaval in ancient Israel. The monarchy was in its infancy. The first king, Saul, had been anointed by the prophet Samuel around 1025 BCE, bringing Israel into a new political era after the long period of tribal judges. Meanwhile, David, a young shepherd from Bethlehem, had been secretly anointed as the future king. After his victory over Goliath in approximately 1015 BCE, David quickly rose through the ranks of Saul's army, becoming a celebrated war hero and the king's son-in-law. But Saul's mental state deteriorated as paranoia and jealousy consumed him. By 1012 BCE, David had become the target of Saul's murderous campaigns. This brings us to the setting of Psalm 11, David surrounded by danger, possibly hiding in caves or wilderness areas in the Judean hills, with his very life hanging by a thread. Archaeological evidence from this period reveals a landscape dotted with natural hideouts, caves like those at Adullam and En-Gedi, where David and his followers could seek temporary refuge. Now, let us examine the powerful words of this psalm, verse by verse. In the Lord I take refuge. How then can you say to me, flee like a bird to your mountain? These opening words establish the fundamental tension of the psalm. The Hebrew word for refuge, maseh, carries connotations of a strong shelter or fortress. It appears 20 times throughout the Psalms, creating a persistent metaphor of God as the ultimate protector. The rhetorical question David poses reflects his astonishment that anyone would suggest flight when divine protection is available. Historical records suggest David's companions, including the prophet Gad and his loyal friend Jonathan, may have been among those urging him to flee farther into the wilderness. Their concern was legitimate. Saul had already attempted to kill David multiple times, most notably by hurling a spear at him while David played the lyre, an incident recorded in 1 Samuel 18 verse 11. The metaphor of a bird fleeing to the mountains was particularly apt in ancient Israelite culture. Palestine is home to numerous bird species that nest in the region's mountainous terrain. When threatened, these birds instinctively retreat to higher elevations, a natural survival mechanism familiar to any observer of the local wildlife. David's advisors were essentially suggesting he follow this same natural instinct. But David responded with profound spiritual insight. While acknowledging the reality of danger, he refused to be governed by fear. The psalm continues with a vivid description of the threat. "For look, the wicked bend their bows, they set their arrows against the strings to shoot from the shadows at the upright in heart." When the foundations are being destroyed, what can the righteous do? Here, David doesn't downplay the danger. The imagery of archers lying in wait, concealed in darkness, ready to ambush the innocent, would have resonated powerfully with his original audience. Bow hunting was common in ancient Israel, with archaeological findings from this period including arrowheads crafted from bronze and iron. The sudden, silent nature of an arrow attack perfectly captured the treacherous threats David faced. The mention of foundations refers to both societal order and moral principles. During this period, around 1010 BCE, the newly formed Israelite monarchy was still establishing its institutions. Legal structures, military organizations, and religious practices were all in development. The Hebrew word for foundations, shathith, can also refer to the pillars that support a building. When these fundamental structures collapse, chaos ensues. This imagery would have been especially meaningful in ancient Israel, where earthquakes were common. The Jordan Rift Valley, running through the heart of the region, marks the boundary between tectonic plates. Archaeological evidence confirms that significant seismic activity occurred during the early monarchy period. The terror of feeling solid ground suddenly become unstable provided a powerful metaphor for societal breakdown. The question, "What can the righteous do?" reads almost like a cry of despair. But remarkably, it's not. It's a rhetorical device leading to David's profound answer in the verses that follow. "The Lord is in his holy temple, the Lord is on his heavenly throne. He observes everyone on earth, his eyes examine them." Here, David shifts perspective dramatically, from the earthly threats surrounding him to the cosmic reality of God's sovereignty. The Hebrew term for temple, here, hekel, refers not to the Jerusalem temple, which wouldn't be built until Solomon's reign beginning around 970 BCE, but to God's heavenly dwelling place. The ancient Near Eastern concept of divine kingship permeates this imagery. Throughout the region, from Egypt to Mesopotamia, gods were understood to rule from celestial thrones, overseeing human affairs. What distinguished Israelite belief was the concept of a single divine sovereign rather than a pantheon of competing deities. Archaeological discoveries from sites like Ugarit, modern-day Ras Shamra in Syria, have revealed texts from the 13th to 12th centuries BCE describing divine councils where gods sat on thrones. The Israelite adaptation of this imagery portrayed Yahweh alone as the true king, rendering all earthly rulers, even Israel's own monarchy, as ultimately answerable to divine authority. The concept of divine observation, "his eyes examine them," uses language reminiscent of metalworking. The Hebrew verb bakon originally referred to the testing of metals, particularly the process of heating gold or silver to reveal its purity. This metaphor suggests God doesn't merely see human actions but tests and evaluates character at the deepest level. The Lord examines the righteous, but the wicked, those who love violence, he hates with a passion. On the wicked he will rain fiery coals and burning sulfur, a scorching wind will be their lot. This passage introduces the ancient concept of divine judgment, a foundational belief in Israelite religion that distinguished it from many surrounding cultures. While neighboring belief systems often portrayed divine beings as capricious and immoral, Israelite theology emphasized God's moral character and just governance. The language of fiery coals and burning sulfur evokes powerful memories in Israelite tradition. By the time of David, circa 1010 BCE, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah's destruction by burning sulfur, Genesis 19 verse 24, had been transmitted through approximately 900 years of oral tradition. This catastrophic event, which geological evidence suggests may correspond to a massive earthquake and petroleum fire near the Dead Sea around 1900 BCE, became emblematic of divine judgment against wickedness. The "scorching wind" reference would have been immediately recognizable to inhabitants of ancient Palestine. The region experiences the Khamsin, a hot, dry wind from the Arabian desert that can raise temperatures dramatically within hours. These winds, occurring primarily between February and June, created conditions where temperatures could soar above 100 degrees Fahrenheit 38 degrees Celsius, causing heat stroke and crop damage. Natural phenomena thus became powerful metaphors for divine judgment. What's particularly notable about this passage is how it balances the concepts of divine testing and divine judgment. The same God who examines, or tests, the righteous also brings judgment upon the wicked. This reflects a sophisticated theological understanding that divine scrutiny serves different purposes depending on one's moral orientation. The psalm concludes with a profound statement of hope. For the Lord is righteous, he loves justice, the upright will see his face. This final verse provides the ultimate reason for David's confidence. The Hebrew word for righteous, tzaddik, carries connotations not just of moral perfection but of faithfulness to covenant relationships. In ancient Near Eastern cultures, including Israel, covenants formed the foundation of social and political order. Kings were expected to maintain justice as part of their covenant responsibilities. The phrase, "he loves justice," connects to a broader theme in Hebrew scripture. The Hebrew concept of justice, mishpat, encompasses more than merely punishing wrongdoing. It includes the positive establishment of right relationships and social harmony. Archaeological findings, including law codes from contemporary cultures like the Middle Assyrian laws, circa 1075 BCE, show that establishing justice was considered the primary duty of ancient Near Eastern rulers. The final promise, "the upright will see his face," represents the ultimate reward. In ancient court etiquette throughout the Near East, access to the king's face symbolized favor and acceptance. Royal inscriptions from Assyria and Babylon frequently mention the privilege of standing in the king's presence as the highest honor. By adapting this court imagery to the divine-human relationship, David expresses confidence in ultimate vindication. What makes Psalm 11 so remarkable is not just its poetic beauty but its practical application. Far from being a mere theological abstraction, this psalm emerged from life-threatening circumstances. Historical records suggest that during this period, approximately 1011 to 1010 BCE, David fled between various locations including the wilderness of Ziph, the strongholds of En-Gedi, and even enemy Philistine territory to escape Saul's pursuit. The archaeological record from this period reveals a landscape of conflict. Excavations at sites like Tel Kiyafa, which some scholars identify as the biblical Sheraim, have uncovered fortified settlements dating to the early 10th century BCE, precisely the period when David was transitioning from fugitive to king. These discoveries confirm the historical reality of organized military campaigns during this era. Against this backdrop of danger, David made a counterintuitive choice. Rather than following conventional wisdom and fleeing further into hiding, he grounded his security in divine protection. This wasn't blind optimism or passive resignation, it was active trust that informed strategic decision-making. How does this ancient poem speak to us today? Consider our contemporary landscape. According to the World Economic Forum's 2024 Global Risks Report, we face unprecedented combinations of environmental, technological, and geopolitical threats. The foundations of international order established after World War II appear increasingly fragile. Social cohesion within many nations has deteriorated, with polarization reaching levels not seen since the 1930s. When we feel these foundations shaking beneath us, Psalm 11 offers a profound alternative to both panic and denial. It acknowledges real dangers while refusing to be defined by them. It shifts perspective from immediate threats to eternal realities. And it grounds ethical action in divine justice rather than expediency. Consider how this played out in David's own life. Historical records indicate that twice during his period as a fugitive, recorded in 1 Samuel 24 and 26, David had opportunities to kill King Saul but refused, precisely because he trusted God's justice rather than taking matters into his own hands. Archaeological evidence from this period reveals that political assassinations were common throughout the ancient Near East. David's restraint represented a radical moral choice grounded in the theology expressed in Psalm 11. By 1004 BCE, approximately 6 years after composing this psalm, David became king over Judah following Saul's death at the Battle of Mount Gilboa. By 997 BCE, he had united the northern and southern tribes, establishing his capital at Jerusalem. The very man who had been advised to flee like a bird ultimately established a dynasty that would shape history for centuries. But Psalm 11 isn't merely about political survival or military victory. It's about maintaining moral integrity amid pressure to compromise. Archaeological findings throughout the ancient Near East reveal how frequently besieged rulers resorted to increasingly brutal tactics when threatened. The Assyrian royal annals from the 9th to 7th centuries BCE, for instance, proudly detail torture methods used against enemies. Against this cultural backdrop, David's insistence on ethical boundaries, even when fighting for his life, stands as a remarkable testament to the power of faith-based moral reasoning. This ethical framework, articulated in Psalm 11, would later influence the development of Western concepts of just governance and limited power. Today, we might not face pursuing armies or literal archers in the shadows. But we confront our own versions of crumbling foundations, economic uncertainty, environmental degradation, institutional failure, and social fragmentation. Recent psychological research confirms what the ancient psalmist intuited: perspective dramatically affects resilience. A 2023 study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that individuals who maintained a broader temporal perspective during crises demonstrated significantly greater emotional regulation and decision-making capacity. This is precisely what Psalm 11 offers, a shift from temporal panic to eternal perspective. The psalm doesn't deny danger but reframes it within a larger reality. When David refuses to flee like a bird, he's not exhibiting reckless bravado but demonstrating the courage that comes from seeing beyond immediate threats. Neuroscience research from Stanford University published in February 2024 indicates that practices cultivating psychological distance, the ability to view immediate situations from a broader perspective, significantly reduce amygdala activation associated with fear responses. This allows access to higher cognitive functions in the prefrontal cortex, enabling more reasoned decision-making under pressure. The ancient wisdom of Psalm 11 thus finds validation in contemporary science. When we shift our gaze from the archers in the shadows to the divine throne room, we access cognitive and emotional resources otherwise unavailable to us. The practical applications of this psalm extend far beyond individual psychology. Throughout history, communities facing existential threats have drawn strength from its perspective. During the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century, religious minorities across Europe faced brutal persecution. Historical records indicate that Psalm 11 became particularly popular among Huguenot communities in France. After the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre of 1572, when thousands of Protestants were killed, surviving communities incorporated this psalm into their worship liturgies as an assertion of divine justice amid apparent triumph of wickedness. Similarly, during the American civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s, African American churches frequently turned to Psalm 11. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. referenced its imagery in his 1963 letter from Birmingham jail, connecting the psalm's vision of divine justice to the moral foundations of nonviolent resistance. What makes Psalm 11 particularly relevant today is its nuanced approach to security. It avoids both naive optimism that ignores real threats and paranoid fear that sees only danger. Instead, it offers a third path, clear-eyed assessment of danger coupled with profound trust in transcendent protection. The Psalm's central question, when the foundations are being destroyed, what can the righteous do? Resonates powerfully in our age of institutional distrust. According to the 2024 Edelman Trust Barometer, global trust in major institutions, government, media, business, and NGOs, has declined for 5 consecutive years, reaching historic lows in many regions. Psalm 11 suggests that when external structures fail, we must anchor ourselves in deeper realities. This doesn't mean withdrawing from social responsibility. David himself would later become king and build new foundations. Rather, it means refusing to let fear of collapse define our actions and identity. The theological perspective offered in Psalm 11 has profound implications for how we approach contemporary challenges. Consider 3 specific applications. First, in our age of information overload and constant threat narratives, Psalm 11 offers a disciplined practice of perspective shifting. When headlines scream that foundations are collapsing, the psalm invites us to lift our gaze to what remains unshaken. This isn't denial but the cultivation of spiritual resilience. Second, the psalm challenges our instinct for self-preservation at all costs. David refused advice that prioritized physical safety over moral integrity. In our own context, this might mean resisting the temptation to sacrifice ethical principles for security, whether at personal, community, or national levels. Third, Psalm 11's vision of divine justice provides hope for societies struggling with corruption and abuse of power. The psalm insists that wickedness, particularly violence, does not have the final word. This perspective has inspired justice movements throughout history, providing stamina for long-term ethical action when immediate outcomes seem discouraging. What's particularly striking about Psalm 11 is how it integrates theology with practical action. Far from promoting passive resignation, David's trust in divine protection informed strategic decisions. He didn't flee to the mountains as advised, but neither did he rashly confront Saul's superior forces. Historical records from 1 Samuel indicate he navigated the dangerous political landscape with remarkable wisdom, building alliances and choosing battles carefully. This integration of faith and practical wisdom offers a model for facing contemporary crises. Whether confronting climate change, political polarization, economic inequality, or technological disruption, we need both transcendent perspective and strategic action. Psalm 11 reminds us that courageous resilience flows not from denial of danger but from connection to something greater than the threat. Archaeological evidence confirms that during this exact period, circa 1010 BCE, Israel faced multiple external threats, including Philistine military pressure from the west and emerging Aramean powers from the north. Yet David's response wasn't panic but perspective shifting that enabled clear-headed strategy. As we conclude our exploration of this ancient text, let's return to its opening question, "In the Lord I take refuge." How then can you say to me, "Flee like a bird to your mountain"? 3,000 years after these words were written, we face our own mountains of escape, whether through physical relocation, digital distraction, ideological bubbles, or substance dependence. The impulse to flee from complexity and challenge remains powerfully human. Psalm 11 doesn't shame this impulse but transforms it. Yes, we need refuge, not in mountains or caves but in the divine presence that remains constant when everything else shifts. This isn't escapism but the ultimate grounding that enables us to stand firm amid uncertainty. The historical David eventually emerged from his period of crisis to lead with wisdom and establish a legacy that shaped civilization. The psalm he composed during his darkest hour continues to provide perspective for countless individuals facing their own moments of decision between flight and faith. What mountains are you being advised to flee to today? What foundations seem to be crumbling beneath your feet? And what might it look like for you to find refuge not in escape but in the divine presence that transforms perspective? When the archers take aim from the shadows, when trusted institutions fail, when violence seems to triumph, Psalm 11 reminds us that reality is larger than what threatens us. The righteous need not flee when their refuge is in the one whose throne remains unshaken. For the Lord is righteous, he loves justice, the upright will see his face. Before you go, I want to personally invite you to be part of our growing community here at Prayer Universe. If this video touched your heart or brought you peace, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a prayer or message that can uplift your spirit. But most importantly, I'd love to hear from you. In the comments below, share just one word or phrase of motivation that this video inspired in you, whether it's hope, gratitude, peace, or something else. Your words matter deeply to us because they help guide the content we create for this channel. Together, let's build a space filled with faith, encouragement, and connection. Thank you for being here, and remember, every prayer counts. See you in the next one.